Thane, welcome back to the podcast, my friend.
Scott, you have a great show, great podcast, and I'm always happy to be on it.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to have you. It really is. You've written a book that is certainly you're no stranger to a little bit of controversy. So I don't have to preface it with that, but I'm sure it will spark some controversy. It's an incredibly well written book, thoughtful book, certainly to be provocative to some. The title is Beyond Proportionality: Israel's Just War in Gaza. Just war theory has a grand tradition going back formally in Western history, I think to St. Augustine. And this is the idea that there is an ethical standard in the Western tradition, in Christianity and Judaism and Western philosophy, that warfare isn't to be just engaged in willy-nilly, that there are ethical boundaries and guidelines. And this is something that's been debated, talked about, and thought about intensely since 9/11, of course, and in the proliferation of non-state actors in engagement with the West. Your claim is that Israel's war in Gaza meets the just war standard, is it not?
Oh, it's not even a close call. On October 7th, a non-state terrorist entity, 4,000 of them, with 2,000 civilians. It's very important to point that out. 6,000 total, but a third of them were actually just civilians. Attacked Israel, invaded its sovereignty, and killed teenagers who were there at a rock concert. That's what they were there. Many of them had tattoos and nose piercings. This was the left-wing Jews. These were not religious settlers, not that anyone would deserve this, but they went ahead and massacred 1,200 young people who had just stayed up all night listening to music, along with a lot of other people from neighboring villages who were, again, peaceniks. People believed in a two-state solution. And they not just attacked them, but they raped girls in front of boyfriends. They beheaded people. Beheaded, I'm going to say that again. They beheaded people, right? Immediately you hear that, you should say, barbarians. Who does that? Who would do that? And to behead kids. They torched babies. They gang raped girls in front of boyfriends. So if you're watching this video, you have to say, oh my God, I can't imagine that. I would be held down and my girlfriend was being gang raped. Those women sometimes were then machine guns was fired into their genitalia. Their breasts were removed, cut off. A woman who was pregnant, the fetus was ripped out of her stomach. There's a word for this, barbarism. That's a war of aggression. That is a war that begins on October 7th. Immediately during that war, rockets were being fired from Gaza into Israel to civilian population centers. Rockets were being fired, and the rockets never stopped. Hostages were taken, and they were never returned. The people of Gaza cheered wildly. This was the greatest day in their lives. They adore Hamas. They believe that everything that was done on October 7th was justifiable and correct. And they cheered them, and the hostages were jeered, spit upon. Corpses were dragged on the street. In the book, as you know, there's an anecdote about some guy, Gazan, who had the head of an Israeli, and he had owned a ice cream store. So he took the head and put it in the freezer, hoping to sell it to somebody for money. This is what university students are cheering for. So the hostages were never returned. The rockets were never abated, and no one laid down weapons. And under international law, Israel had a free pass to do everything within military necessity to eliminate the danger, retaliate appropriately, and create deterrence. And the only deterrence would be to fully eliminate Hamas. And that's what they've been trying to do all along.
You bring up an anecdote where there was a woman, I think she was in Canada, and right after October 7th, during the protests in the West here, she had something akin to, "You don't have the right to dictate how we resist." I'm butchering the quote, but something like basically saying, right, that you're not allowed to, that these rapes and beheadings and macheting women genital breasts and shooting them in that this is dressed up in the cloak of resistance, right?
Yeah, that's the term of art on campus, by any means necessary. So, this is a way to justify, look, whatever Hamas does is good. They're brown-skinned people going after Jews who are white-skinned people. And they're allegedly Israel stole their land, and therefore they should be able to do whatever they want to whomever they wish. They don't have to fight soldiers. They can fight Israeli babies. They can just put them in ovens by any means necessary. Necessary, that's the right word. You're on college, you have to accept the fact that, yes, I agree, this is necessary. The gang raping was necessary, the torchings were necessary. And yes, it's a photo of a girl at the University of Toronto, very slightly built girl, who's holding up a sign, wearing a keffiyeh mask, and wearing a sign saying, you don't get to question how we resist. And the question is, the reason you're only putting up that sign is because you're a barbarian. That's the only reason you need a sign like that, because that's how you're fighting a war, by gang raping girls. And you probably, since you're at a university, you're somewhat literate, and you probably realize, oh shit, I have to account for this. And I guess the best way to account for it is to say, you don't get to question how I resist. Anything I do to you is acceptable. The problem is that, as you pointed out, there's a long history of the laws of war, the laws of humanitarian law, the laws of armed conflict, the rules of engagement, and they all basically spin around the axis of the word honor. Militaries fight with honor. They don't aim deliberately at civilians. They distinguish combatants from non-combatants. And there are specific rules to protect, not to gang rape civilians, not to throw babies into ovens. This is, on every single level, what happened on October 7th, a violation of international humanitarian law, the laws of war, rules of engagement, everything that was done on that day, every single thing that was done that was celebrated as by any means necessary, violated the laws of war. So then that raises a question. If you're a non-state actor that's a terrorist, and you and a third of your group are civilians, and you come to another country, invade their country, and commit these kinds of crimes, with the full backing of the people back in Gaza, what did you think was going to happen? What could you possibly have expected? I know you think it's permissible to hate Jews so that you can just scream the word genocide and ceasefire and everyone will come running. But what did you think would happen or should happen? That's number one. Number two, why on earth, even though Israel is fighting still pursuant to the laws of war, why should they? All bets are off. If you're already sending a message that babies can be burned and girls can be gang raped, you're basically saying we fight without honor. We're barbarians. That's us. Hello, here we are. And we're allowed to do whatever we want. Why then would anyone point to Israel and say, oh my God, can you believe they're bombing Gaza? Oh my God, I can't believe they're bringing tanks into Gaza. What did you think would happen? And why would you think that? Other than the fact that you must hate Jews, why wouldn't the same people who hold up those signs say, what, let me get my head around this. They gang rape girls our age, the girls that were at a concert. I could have been at a concert. My girlfriend goes to stuff like that. They burned babies. You would think in a just moral world that the university students would have said, we have to take a semester off. We have to get on a flight and fly to Egypt. And we have to go to northern Egypt and make sure that Hamas knows that you attacked kids. You attacked college-age kids and did it with barbaric means. And therefore, we're going to make it known that we are not with you. And instead, we saw, again, a kind of very strange lack of moral confusion, where the people that were being protected were the people that deserved no protection at all. And the people that had been attacked were being questioned for how they retaliated.
You tell a story in the book about an Israeli novelist who I'd never heard of, Amos Oz. Yeah, who is no right-wing fire-breathing Zionist or anything.
He's a
How you
founder
describe?
of Peace Now. He was one of the founders of Peace Now. He was opposed to all the settlements, and he was one of the leaders of the movement for Peace Now to create a Palestinian homeland. That guy, yeah.
So he gives an interview with Deutsche Welle or something, a German periodical, a German magazine, and they're shocked. I mean, they figure that he's going to roast his own people. This is in this European magazine, and he doesn't, right? I mean, can you speak to that a little bit about his response to this German interviewer?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite anecdotes about the absurdity of Israel's moral position and what they're being asked to do, because this took place during the last Gaza war, 2014, where guess what? They were using human shields and they were aiming at Israeli civilians. 10,000 rockets had been fired at Israel, and they were trying to put a stop to it. And civilians were being killed, as they always are, as collateral damage in war. And so the world, yet again, 2014, 10 years ago, erupted against Israel for self-defense. And the Germans had Amos Oz, the perfect guest, the founder of the Peace Now movement. And they thought, oh, this is great. We're going to watch him trash Israel on German TV. And he said, let me make a statement before we begin. And he said, I have a next door neighbor who gets on his terrace and puts his child on his lap and fires machine guns into my daughter's nursery. What do you want me to do about that? And then the German interviewers were shocked. They're saying, wow, we didn't expect you would give us that question. Then he says, here, what about that same neighbor digging a tunnel under my child's nursery for the purpose of kidnapping or killing my child? What do you expect me to do about this? You're asking me, I'm not supposed to fire back? I'm not supposed to protect my child? I'm not supposed to destroy the tunnels? You're telling me that I shouldn't fire back because the father put his own son on his knee? If he is that negligent, criminally negligent a parent, that is not on me. That's on him. If he thinks that he can sacrifice his child, it means nothing to him. I have under no moral obligation to place greater value on his daughter than on my daughter. There's no reason for that. You have to ask yourself, what kind of a man would put his child on his knee and fire a machine gun and not expect that there would be return fire? And I think that it summed up the problem, that Israelis, even on the far left, knew that this is what we're dealing with, barbarism. And we cannot, there's an expression in the book that the Israelis use that I give to American audiences. I don't do it in Hebrew, but it says, we cannot allow the Arabs to out crazy us. Meaning, we know that there's nothing they won't do. They don't value, like they celebrate death. They're largely a death cult, and they're very comfortable sacrificing their own. And if you live in, a nice suburb of America, you think that's ridiculous. Well, it is ridiculous, but you have to recognize, maybe if you left your country and traveled, if you'd been to some of these Arab Muslim societies, you'd realize that's exactly what they think, that Allah is asking for this and the child will go to a better place. Yes, it's insane, but it is their belief system. And so they do have a civilian death strategy, and they use it brilliantly because they know that it will spark anti-Semitic feelings and engage in a kind of incitement against Jews and incitement against Israel. But you have to look at it for what it is, that Israel has no other choice but to retaliate. It's just like it's saying on October 8th, a lot of countries said Israel has rights to self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter, but then you can't kill anybody. You have the right to defend yourself, of course, Israel, but are you killing anyone? Because we couldn't possibly have you kill anybody. That's what the world has essentially said.
Yeah, sometimes it seems like, and I'm not an expert on these things, but sometimes the limited knowledge I have on international law and these sorts of things, as a layman, it seems to me that if you want to understand international law, that you read the statute and then you put a comma and add except for Israel.
Yes, exactly.
and,
No,
and
no,
then you would
I
have
mean, well, let me just say this. There are real genocides going on in the world right now. First of all, there are 500,000 Syrians. There's 300,000 Tigrayans in Ethiopia. There are 400,000 from Darfur in Sudan, Darfurians. There were, of course, 600,000 Tutsis in Rwanda. These are really big numbers. Here's another number for you, Scott. There are 1 million ethnic Muslims in China. They're called the Uyghurs. 1 million. They're Muslims. So that means, well, they're Muslims. They're like the Palestinians. They must be a sacred people. You can't possibly kill them. You can't possibly kill a Muslim. 1 million Muslims live in China, and they're being killed, murdered, forced sterilization, forced abortions, put in concentration camps. That's truly the wiping out of a people. It's the perfect definition to eliminate a people in whole or in part. Are there any protests for the Uyghurs? Here's a better one. Do people go up to Chinese Americans and punch them in the face and say, I'm doing this because of the Uyghurs? Your people are doing this to the poor Uyghurs? Does anyone go into a Chinese restaurant and start screaming, genocide, genocide, genocide? Why not? What about the poor Uyghurs? 1 million of them.
I'm still waiting. I'm waiting for the queers for the Uyghurs.
Yeah, the queers for the Uyghurs, right. I mean, this is so absurd. You have actual definitional genocides taking place in the world, but you're going after the one country that's fighting in self-defense. And yes, in a war of self-defense, there's something called collateral damage. Why does it the word casualties of war mean collateral damage? They are collateral to the aim of the war. They are ancillary. They're there, they're damaged, but they're collateral. They're not the reason for the war. They're being in harm's way. And in this case, they're deliberately in harm's way. They choose to be in harm's way. They're warned to your building is going to be demolished. People don't realize the Israelis send out tens of thousands of emails, text messages. They drop loudspeakers down on parachutes into areas that say, tomorrow at 5 p.m., your building, because it's a haven for terrorists, is scheduled for demolition. Please immediately take your family and go to the humanitarian corridor over there. It tells you where to go. They're not going. They don't want to go. And they're not being forced to not go. They just don't want to go. They want to serve their people. So the point is, Israel is fighting a just war, and they're fighting it justly. It's just that there's a lot of collateral damage. And because Israel has the Iron Dome, its civilians are protected. The Palestinian Gazans are not protected because their underground bunkers are used to hide Hamas and weapons. And the people are out on the street getting ready to be killed as human shields. So we have a classic example of collateral damage that we didn't call genocide in Hiroshima or Nagasaki or Dresden or Mosul when we eliminated ISIS, where the numbers of combatants to non-combatants was 5 times, or non-combatants, 5 times more non-combatants, civilians were killed to combat. And yet here with Israel, where the ratio is almost 1-to-1, it's genocide.
You bring up, that's interesting that you bring up Dresden, because you bring up Dresden in the book, and you talk about how the fact that it had very little strategic or military value. But Hitler was very proud of the city. It's a great, like, Baroque architecture. It was this lovely cultural. So Churchill really took delight in giving a bloody nose, a real cultural bloody nose to firebombing this city, just because it was a crown jewel, just for the demoralization of Germany. And we don't look back. In fact, there was this is celebrated. I mean, in England to this day, right?
The performance a few years ago, what was something of war that won the Academy Award, was a homage to Churchill. Churchill is, by many Westerners, a beloved wartime prime minister. And yes, he told British and American bombers to bomb the great cities of Germany with little military significance, because he wanted the civilians to get the message. This is You were adoring Chancellor Hitler. Nice call, good judgment. And you then allowed him to bomb London into pieces. And we want this war to end, and we want you to end it. And you know what else happened? In the Civil War, the war came to an end with General Sherman, Tecumseh Sherman's march that burned Atlanta to the ground. Why? This not because there was a Confederate army there, because he wanted the biggest city in the South to know this war needs to come to an end. And the civilians, in fact, are going to be paying a price. And in siege warfare, we're going to burn out all your farms. We're not trying to feed your army. We want to starve your army. This is what happens in war. But again, Israel's not allowed to fight a war. They're not allowed to defend themselves. And the basic, courtesies that we recognize, the doctrines that we recognize as part of a military necessity are not allowed to Israel. The minute they start killing anybody in a manner that is completely acceptable under the laws of armed conflict, where people are shouting ceasefire and genocide. And in no other conflicts have we seen anything like this before or since. And I can assure you, when this war is over, people aren't going to watch your podcast and go, wow, I never thought about that. America perpetrated a genocide. We just gave an Academy Award to Oppenheimer, and it wasn't like people walked away from that movie and said, whoa, isn't that genocide? We knew, even the scientists were ambivalent about that. They knew the power of the secret weapon, and people walked away. The same college students didn't walk around and go, whoa, that movie, Christopher Nolan's movie, was really rocked my world. And now I am going to really object to the United States because I think we're a genocidal nation. I don't know of any student that said that, but they do say it with respect to Israel when Israel isn't aiming at civilians. They're not aiming at civilian installations. They're aiming at command centers, at warehousing of weapons, storage facilities of weapons, communication centers, and especially Hamas fighters and their commanders.
Yeah, I mean, there's this principle in ethics, double effect, right? And the idea is that if you had a tenement or something, that an apartment building that was suspected of being a warehouse for terrorists, and you bombed it and you didn't kill any civilians, you wouldn't double back and then kill the civilians, right? If the civilians died, that would be tragic. But if you miss the civilians, oh, thank God we didn't kill any civilians, you wouldn't double back and kill them, right? And that's what you're arguing essentially in the book, right? That when civilians die, that when Hamas targets and kills civilians, it's a win. I mean, that's the goal. And when Israel does it, it's collateral damage and a byproduct of trying to destroy legitimate military targets.
Yeah, Israel knows that collateral. Look, given what you've seen for the last 19 months, Scott, and given what Israel experienced in the 2014 war, which we discussed earlier, do you not think that they would love it if they could get all of the kids out of Gaza and move them someplace, and all of the women move them out? They benefit in no way from dead civilians. They don't get it. You can see from the world's outrage, they don't benefit. So if there was a way to excise, pull out the terrorists, pull out the militants, and fight with them on an actual battlefield, Israelis would be overjoyed. And Scott, if Israel really was trying to wipe out the Palestinian people, their Air Force could do this in a few hours, right? Israel's military might is exceptional. And so if they could not, why should they lose any soldiers by having them invade Gaza? If you're an Israeli mother, you should say to the Netanyahu, just bomb the hell out of them. Why are we I don't want my son to be killed. I don't see any, if the goal is just to wipe out the Palestinians, we don't need to invade. One of the reasons they do invade is because to go house to house minimizes civilian death. And Israel is seeking and has always been seeking, but it doesn't make a difference because the Gazan health ministry counts all deaths as civilian deaths. So when they throw out the number 53,000, Israel believes that 50% of that, whatever the number is, 50% are Hamas fighters or Islamic Jihad. Another 30% are the families of Islamic Jihad and Hamas. So it's really 20% are civilians who don't want to leave and are caught in this or prepared to die for the cause. So, but yet you hear the words 53,000. And my God, that's obviously genocide. But it's not, because first of all, that's not even the right number. The Gaza Health Ministry, in the book, there's a whole chapter about their open, blatant lying. When we're looking now, some of the think tanks have been looking at the actual records. They're counting people that die of cancer as killed by Israelis. They're actually counting, they counted a woman who hadn't even died yet, but her name was listed as dead. They're counting men as women. So people named Muhammad were listed as women. They're counting men as infants.
Well, look. Now, Thane, this just shows their sensitivity to trans identity. Maybe Muhammad did identify as a woman.
Yeah, that's
did you ever
right.
think of that?
Well, right. Good luck convincing a Sharia law believer of that. So I'm just saying, people use the number. I'm saying, even if you give them the numbers, 80% of them are either terrorists or families of terrorists who the terrorist wants to keep on their knee. And so that number is a very small number of actual civilians who, for whatever their reasons, don't want to protect themselves. And I got the best example, and again, the press doesn't want to cover this. You have to read my book to know any of this. But did you notice that when Israel made ended Hezbollah's power in Lebanon, notice what happened when Israel turned its attention in the fall of 2024 to Hezbollah? That's when the exploding pagers and the exploding cell phones. Did you notice that no one focused on civilian death? Israel was fighting the same war. They were using the same bombs with the same blast radius, the same weapons, the same intelligence they used, everything same drone intelligence. Why is it that no one's talking about the Lebanese dead? You want to know, Scott? Because they're not
Jews.
They're not in snow, because they're not insane. They leave.
Right.
The minute they know that Israel is going to be bombing the shit out of them, they go.
They leave.
They hate Hezbollah. They see them as an invading army, and they get the hell out, like any normal person would do. So that way, Israel has a much cleaner battlefield. It's still asymmetric. They're still firing at buildings and hospitals and mosques and schools, but there are no civilians around because they get out of the way. And people are not, Gazans are not held to any moral scrutiny to the extent to which that they are complicit in their own suffering, that they deserve an appropriate level amount of blame for the situation that they're in. You elected a terrorist organization to represent you, and then you had them go across the border with civilians and gang rape kids. What did you think?
What do you say? I had this conversation with a friend today, and I made this point. I said, what do you do with the fact that you elected people that have in their charter, we're going to kill the Jews? I mean, it's not a nuanced position, right? I mean, it's not ambiguous like Trump's healthcare plan. It's pretty clear. Yeah. And he said, well, look at those elections. And he said, were they really, those elections are a mess. And that's not, I mean, what do you do? What do you do when people say to you,
the polling, Scott, tell your imbecile friend, and please make sure he watches this. Tell your imbecile friend, the imbecile from here on to be known.
Very educated guy.
What's that? No, if that's the best he could do, he's not an educated guy, or he's a Jew hater. An educated guy wouldn't say, oh, well, those elections. The polling is overwhelming. Hamas is wildly popular. So it's not like there's something wrong with the elections. They didn't steal the election. This is not the 2020 election in the United States where people are using stealing elections. Hamas legitimately won that election and immediately started killing their political adversaries. So the fact that your friend all of a sudden is saying, well, that's not really an election. That election, they haven't had a second election because they don't need one. They worship Hamas. They celebrated Hamas. And so anyone that's trying to make excuses for Hamas, that's the reason that woman held up the sign. Your imbecile friend is not alone. She holds up the sign because she can't explain it any other way. She just says, you have no right to reject the way we choose to fight. And the answer is, actually, we do. Actually, civilized people can make a claim and say, this is not how wars are fought. We don't, military strategists, there is long line of doctrine that wars are to be followed, to be waged with honor. And that doesn't mean by any means necessary. That means you make distinctions between civilians and non-civilians. You only aim at targets that have military necessity. And if you don't aim at that, it has to be significant necessity, because otherwise, if it's not necessary or essential enough, the damage that would be collateral would be disproportionate. So disproportionate has nothing to do with the numbers of dead. It's what are you aiming at? If you're aiming at something that's a legitimate target, you can expect to receive collateral damage, and it's not called genocide.
Now, I pulled up a poll that I found the other day that support for Hamas in Gaza is down. Actually, now before the war it was like 60%. Now it's down to 38%, which is still high. 4 in 10.
The statistic is 90% if do you agree with what happened on October 7th?
Right. On the 7th,
do you
sure,
believe that war crimes were committed? Over 90% of the Gazans believe nothing. That is fully, that means we believe in slicing off the breasts of teenagers. We're all in on that, all right? The polling has been much higher than 60% on general support. Now the war has really come to an end, and there isn't anything left in Gaza. So yeah, the numbers are down. But if you look at Gaza now, and you look at the number of civilians, let's say there's 20,000 civilians that are not fighters or families of the fighters. That's still a lot of people. You would think the Gazans would say, we have no support for Hamas, 0%, 2%. And instead, Hamas is resupplying. They have new recruits, fresh recruits, replacing the old ones. So, when you talk about your friend, he's like, is it a genocidal regime? They still haven't put down their weapons. They still, they're still recruiting. They're firing any rocket they have. Why should Israel not be, again, another invasion? They're not surrendering. This is not, Israel would not have achieved deterrence, and every nation has the right in war to achieve deterrence and fight on until that's ultimately achieved. So we still have 60 hostages. Let me get this straight. Let me ask your imbecile friend. There are still 60. I hope he's watching this. He can write me if he can spell. I don't know if he can, but there are 60 hostages. They're recruiting more terrorists, and they're still firing rockets. Genocide! Really. Israel has every right under international law to finish the job.
Now, what would finishing the job look like? That's a good question. I mean, what's the end game? Because part of just war theory is a measurable objective, right? Something you can do, actually. What do you think is the end game that would end the conflict in a way that would procure Israeli security? That Israel, where its citizens would not fear another horrific day like
Hamas needs to put down their weapons, and they need to leave Gaza. They can't stay. They have to go somewhere. They got to go. Israel needs to create a buffer of security that can be helped by other Arab and Muslim nations to help secure it along with Israel. Israel doesn't want to reoccupy Gaza. They left Gaza. So when students refer to the open air prison, the reason they say open air prison because there hasn't been one Jew who lived in Gaza since 2005. So that's a very strange occupation that has no people in it that are purportedly.
And when people say, I think, when you make the point in your book, right, that when people conflate occupation, they're really talking about Israel limiting certain kinds of goods that can come in to Gaza because they're afraid of weaponry and things. They're afraid of they're
It's a
trying, which
blockade.
Egypt has done as well, right? Egypt
Exactly.
doesn't want people from Gaza coming in for this very fact, because they're Muslim Brotherhood types in Gaza. Egypt
Yes.
doesn't want them in their borders either.
Yeah. Nobody wants the Gazans. What does that tell you? Nobody wants them. There's got to be a reason. They're only useful in order to be an anti-Semite and have a justification for it. But no one wants them. They're seen as a terrorist people, a subset of the Palestinians that only love. They're a death cult. And so the Gazans, the Egyptians quite appropriately don't want it. And yes, there's a blockade because the only thing they're interested in is supplies for tunnels and weapons. If Israel saw that they were trying to build hotels along the Mediterranean, let me tell you something, the Gaza coastline is a knockout. And that's why Trump was talking about taking it over. He's not stupid. He's a real estate guy. He just looks at the Gazans and say, what's wrong with you people? Or what kind of people are you? You can have hotels. This could be Shangri-La. If you could just lick your habit of Jewish blood. If you could
just
try.
so long as none of the Palestinians figure out what he did in Atlantic City, I think he'd have a shot. Yeah, I grew up in New Jersey.
Well, let me just say this. When Sheldon Adelson, who is a right-wing Jew and the owner, I forgot the name of I guess it's the Sands Group. They own hotels in Macau and in Las Vegas. If Hamas had called him, and this is a right-wing Jew, and said, Mr. Adelson, you're a Jew and we hate your guts. But I'll tell you what, we're trying to lick our habit of Jewish blood. We really don't want to be killers. We want to learn how to be statesmen. We don't want to be, interested only in the genocide of Jews. We want to see what we could build here in this. Would you come to Gaza and help us plan hotels along? He would have loved this. He would have said, let me help you. This could be great. The only reason there's a blockade is because Hamas and the Gazans have shown no interest in nation building or statesmanship. And if they demonstrated any interest in that, the Israelis would not have a blockade. Israel wants to invent cool shit. They like inventing things. They like new technologies. They want to win more Nobel Prizes. That's what they really, really want. They have no interest in anything else. They would be thrilled if they could rededicate some of their energy towards startup companies instead of fighting terrorism. But they can't. So the end game has to be the end of terrorism to its south and to its west. And that's going to be very hard because even in the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority, although not as crazy, perhaps because they're much less religious than the Gazans, also don't have a really great appetite for a two-state solution. Remember, From the River to the Sea is a genocidal song. Globalize the Intifada is a genocidal song. It's saying eliminate the Jews, free this land of the Jews. Israel has no choice but to defend itself because the people that they're purportedly trying to develop a two-state solution are only interested in one state, a state without Jews.
Yeah, I mean, this is a challenge, right, of Islam, I think, and not that there aren't Muslims that are in Western nations that have acclimated to liberal democracy and pluralism, but they've done that largely because they've acclimated. I mean, Judaism and Christianity have both come up in the West. There's been an enlightenment. There's been a cultural legacy where tolerance and pluralism have permeated those religious traditions, pre-modern traditions that evolved in modernity. I mean, Islam has not had that, right? I mean, it's a pre-modern tradition that hasn't had the Enlightenment sort of experience yet. I mean, maybe that's possible. We see this. I
wonder what your friend would say about that. I'm sure you'd come up with some stupid excuse. They don't. Yeah, you're right. Christianity had, the Vatican II in the 1960s, right? The Gospels were rewritten to recognize that Jews didn't kill Jesus. Judaism has Reform Judaism, Reconstructionist Judaism. All Jews do is try to come up with new commentaries on their religion. It's only one religion in the world that cannot see any change, that the whole title of it means submission. It has one word that matters, submission. And if you believe in a strict Sharia law, adherence to Sharia law, you believe in beheadings and dismemberments. And guess what? Good luck, Europe. Europe sees what's happened. There has been no pluralism there. And countries like Germany and Austria and Sweden and France and England are very, very different places. And they're not better. And they're not better. And they're not better in part because the Muslims that are there simply don't want to be Europeans. They want to be Muslims, and they're interested in a caliphate. And the United States has been somewhat protected by that. But honestly, on campus, when you started to see American flags getting burned or draping George Washington in keffiyeh, my first thought was, if you live in Paris or Stockholm or London or Berlin, you're laughing your ass off. You're saying, welcome to the new world, the United States, get ready. And that's, we've let our guard down. Islam needs some reform. And it's not, people talk about moderate Muslims. You don't want moderate Muslims. You want reformist Muslims.
Right.
It's not moderation. You're looking at people, we need to take a critical look at our book, just like all the other religions do. All the other religions.
Isn't this, the world, right? You can, and this is overly general, but I'll say anyway. Largely, right, you have liberal nations and illiberal nations. You have nations that have liberal, democratic, constitutional, bottom-up Republican norms, and ones that don't. And it's interesting. I think about this a lot. All the conflicts in the world are either between two illiberal states, right? You get the Saudis pissed at Yemen or something, or between a liberal and an illiberal state, we're at war with Iraq or something, years ago. But you never have two liberal states go to war, right? Liberal democratic states don't go to war. When there was a dust up a couple of years ago in the English Channel, no one thought England and France were going to, all right, we're back to war. That's just not how liberal democracies work. But Israel has the challenge of being a liberal state with adversaries that are Islamic and illiberal. And to me, that strikes me as the hardest for a liberal state that values human rights and the rules of war. This is kind of the ultimate test to your ethics. Right?
And that's what your friend should be saying. He should be an honest broker. He should be. And by the way, the reason I feel this way about him with such contempt is because I don't have any patience for people that have ready excuses for why Jews should be killed. I don't have patience for this. Oh, it's just a matter of opinion. Oh, I'm just really here for human rights issues. In the end of the day, you're justifying the slaughtering of Jews. And you're holding another side to no standard at all. You're saying, we expect nothing of you, Gazans, and we expect everything of Israelis. And the question is, I can't think of anything more chauvinistic and patronizing. Thanks very much, buddy. Thanks, buddy. I appreciate the vote of confidence that you expect my people to uphold every moral standard, and you expect someone else to go, oh, that's not really an election. I can just see your friend talk like this. And I have no patience for this, because he needs to really sit there and say, you know what? I think Thane Rosenbaum made me right. There's something wrong that I won't go there. Why won't I go there? Why do I see this as this is evil versus good when I'm saying Gazans and Hamas are not good? You should be able to make that moral distinction. You should be able to go gang raping. Let's start with that. You shouldn't be so quickly dismissing that and going to the genocide charge. You should go,
I find, and this is from a progressive guy. Look, I voted for Bernie Sanders every time I could, but I find that most of my progressive friends have more moral sympathy for Gazans who support Hamas than they do fellow Americans that supported Donald Trump.
Absolutely. No, that's why I have no patience for your friend, and I'm happy to continue to call him an imbecile, because I actually think, how is it that you don't see this? What is it about you that looks at Gazans and looks at Hamas and goes, I'm down with that. I'm good with that.
Bill Maher had said that. Bill Maher said this a few years ago on his show. He said it to Ben Affleck, or he's some entertainer.
Oh, yeah, I remember that Ben Affleck thing. Yeah.
And he said, look, why is it that when it comes to Islam, liberals take crazy pills. He says, why won't liberals defend liberal ideas? Why won't you just say female circumcision is mutilation, not a cultural difference? Why won't? And it is interesting. Is it romanticization? Is it? I mean, you mentioned in the book, and I think this is part of it. There's a kind of critical race theory dimension. I'm not against all critical theory or all critical race theory, even, but there is this simplistic narrative where one person becomes white and oppressor, and the other person becomes dark, black, brown, oppressed, and then you get a narrative where everything becomes valorized that the perceived oppressed does. Is that some of why there's such moral blindness around this stuff?
Well, it's more, you have the right words, Scott, and you should tell your friend, watch this part too. This is an example of moral relativism, right? What it's really saying is, and it's a sickness, it's a disease. I think your friend has it. He may not be an imbecile. Maybe he's just sick. The moral relativism goes like this. Who am I to tell another people not to chop heads off? It's their thing. I like the New York Jets. They like to rape girls. I don't tell other people how to live their lives. I don't want to be an imperialist. I don't want to be ethnocentric. I want to respect everybody's traditions. They want to mutilate the person's vagina. Well, let's just call it a circumcision, whatever. It's not for me to say. Instead of what he should be doing, being able to make moral judgments, right and wrong. This is right. This is wrong. This is better than this. They're not relative to each other. This is simply better. Now, he thinks he's morally virtuous because he goes, oh, those brown-skinned Arabs, they're so silly. They just love to chop off heads. They're so silly. Instead of saying, but he's doing that. He may not realize it. He's doing it.
Come on, who doesn't like to get together with their buddies on the weekend?
This is why he's an
chop
imbecile.
off some heads to blow off some
This is
steam.
why he's an imbecile, because he literally is saying, I'm in no position to tell another people how to conduct themselves. All I can do is be rigid against white people. I can be clear of what they must do. And I'm not going to be ethnocentric and tell someone else that they're a barbaric people. Instead of saying, what just happened? And that's exactly what Bill Maher's been trying to say for years. Why are you so easily excusing barbarism? Because you're saying, well, I don't want to criticize Islam. That's why Ben Affleck is an imbecile. He melted down on that show. And I was so happy when Jennifer Garner divorced him, because I thought, what an idiot. Like, it's truly, and people are watching, just go find it. It's very embarrassing. He melted down. He wanted to know, you can't criticize Islam. And so when Sam Harris and Bill Maher said, there's 1.6 billion Arabs, Muslims, but 900,000 of them believe in a strict adherence to Sharia law. So that's a real problem. He said, well, that's racist, but Islam is not a race, right? And you should be able to recognize there's something wrong if 2/3 of your people believe in beheadings and dismemberments and torching homosexuals and throwing them off roofs and hanging homosexuals from uncovering up your women because of modesty. There's something wrong with that culture, and we should try to be respectful but firm that this is not what we allow in the 21st century. And instead, your friend and Ben Affleck are going, I couldn't possibly insult a Muslim. And so you get this very twisted logic. We're saying, I have to accept what they do because they're different, and I have to accept differences.
But isn't this kind of the Huntington thesis, right? In that great book, The Clash of Civilizations, which pre 9/11 kind of people were panning, and then after 9/11 it made the rounds again, and it still seems incredibly relevant to me, where he says, like, basically after the age of ideology, post Cold War, conflicts are not going to be ideology like communism, capitalism. They're going to be civilizational. And he breaks the world down into 7 or 8 sort of cultural, religious civilizations. And he says the conflicts happen on the borders, right? Like in Ukraine, he predicts Ukraine. He's like, it's neither Slavic, Orthodox Russian East or European Catholic Protestant West. It's in the border, and Israel is in this situation, right? It really represents, even though it's in the Middle East, it represents the Western sort of value system, the liberal democratic value system that's in conflict with all of its neighbors, right?
Yeah, well,
And that's just existentially torturous to exist that way.
I wonder what your friend would say. Does he
He's
know?
he's like a co-star of the show right now.
I know. I'm wondering because I'm just fascinated the way his mind doesn't work, right? Because I wonder what he would say. His mind is to say, Palestinians are very clear in the West Bank and Gaza. Should there ever be a country of ours, no Jews could live here. We would have apartheid. We would not. Now, in Israel, 20% of the population are made up of Arabs that serve on the Supreme Court and have full, equal civil, religious, and political rights. They have political parties. There are Druze and Ethiopians. This is a democratic country, and there is religious and political pluralism. And
you could be a Muslim. You could be Muslim and be Prime Minister of Israel.
Yes, absolutely. Or chief of staff of a hospital, or the president of a university, or the chief judge of the Supreme Court. And you're supporting the country that wouldn't let one Jew live here and would burn or torture homosexuals and would behead their women if they were listening to rock music. That's what your friend is defending. And if he's not, he's a liar, because he's implicitly saying, I am showing my sympathy to them, not to the liberal, democratic liberalism, not to a place where gays could go to a concert. Israel is a destination for rock concerts. It's a destination for Western culture. There is no way that any rock band could play in Riyadh or Amman or Ramallah. It doesn't exist. And so you would think what's so strange is that people who are younger or college educated or progressive would say, I'm not supporting that, because that's a return to barbarism. That's not the 21st century. But in the end, implicitly, which is why I'm saying the reason that I have no patience and I'm very comfortable saying you must be an imbecile, because what other justification could you have to support that? To ignore what's so clearly not something that you should be supporting, and instead to say, I want to demonize them and I want to blame them instead.
You make a point in the book I found interesting about just the massive migration over the past decades into cities. The world is just becoming more and more and more urban, and with the sort of liberal conflicts, this is going to, we're going to see this movie played out again in other areas, right?
Except no one will care.
Right, exactly.
That's the difference. The asymmetric warfare that took place in Mosul, there were nobody made a speech during graduation day and said, I'm really, really upset with the civilians that are killed in Mosul. Just because we're trying to eliminate ISIS doesn't mean we should be killing Iraqis. Yeah.
That would be a great thing. That would be a great logo. Q for M, queers for Mosul.
Yeah, where were the queers for Mosul? But the answer is, what's the only distinction that this asymmetric warfare generates all this hysteria about legitimate war aims and military necessity and recharacterizing it as genocide, when in no other part of the world would we do the same thing. The one thing that's common, and I'm going to ask your friend to ask, how much of this is because you hate Jews? Because in the end, I wouldn't give a rat's ass about anyone that lived in Mosul or anywhere else. I would never bother Scott on that. I would just go, I don't know, why would I care about that? But here, for some reason, I'm a little energized. I'm really, really upset about what's happening to the poor Palestinians. When you look at the Palestinians and think, other than perfecting terrorism, what is their contribution? There are other places around the world that there are not only genocides, but there are actual occupations. Northern Cyprus, what does your friend think about that? Kashmir in India. The Kashmiris have been occupied by the Indians. What's up with that, buddy? Have you ever gotten an argument with Scott about the poor Kashmiris? How about the Kurds? The Kurds have never hijacked a flight. They never killed an Olympic team. They never blew anything up, pizza shops. They've never blown anything up. But they have been occupied and persecuted by Turkey, Iraq, and Syria for decades. And when it came to defeating ISIS, they were on our front lines. I don't see your friend chanting for freedom for the Kurds. What's up with that? Is it only because Jews are doing the killing in this case? And you could give a rat's ass about the poor Kurds, but when it comes to Jews, I will not allow a Jew to kill anybody. It bothers, they burn me so much. I'm so bitter that I'm sure he's a failure in life. So it burns me so much that I'm a failure in life. And this is how I'm going to express it. I'm going to challenge Scott on this new book that he's reading.
He's not.
There's no doubt.
He's become a character.
He is. No, I want your readers to hear it unadorned. This is not something that they should be tolerating. They should be looking at this critically and going, shit, this guy's got a point. Maybe why am I so energetic? What's up with that? He's got all that. I don't even know about that other stuff.
And which I've brought this up with several people. I'm losing friends on this issue all the time, but that's fine. I mean,
welcome to my world, buddy.
But Israel. I don't know of an army. And look, I'm not saying that Israel there aren't offenses committed. And you point in the book, you list a few, and you're like, look, what will happen when these people lose control, like all soldiers do in war, and they have to have everywhere. Well, what happened is they
go to jail.
They'll face military justice.
The Supreme Court of Israel has been the harshest critic of the IDF. It's a democratic country.
I would argue, I feel comfortable saying this. I think the IDF is probably the most moral fighting force the planet has ever seen. Certainly more moral than the Allies in World War II. Well, if that was the standard.
Yeah. Well, what army on the planet sends the message to your enemy, this is the building we're going to do tomorrow? You're actually giving them the game plan. You're actually saying to the other side, in order to spare civilian life, we're telling you where we're going to be bombing. Where has that happened in human history? In order to mitigate civilian death, we actually tell the other side, here's the playbook. Here's what the next week is going to look like. Here's how you can defend yourself. We don't want you to defend yourself, but we're moral and you're lunatics and you're going to keep your civilians around. We want to know that we did everything in our power to alert your civilians to get the hell out of the building. And then if they get killed, it's on you. It's not us, because they had knowledge of what was going on and you did not protect them. You used them as shields. So I'm just saying, from the Trojan War until World War II or Mosul, tell me any instance in which one side is telegraphing its war aims to the other side in order to spare civilian life. How is that a genocidal campaign?
I'm curious. Do you think global opinion would be different if the war had a different face on it? Netanyahu is not popular on the world stage at this moment anyway. And let's say it was a politician that was female and attractive and a progressive party or something. Do you think that would change world opinion? Or do you think the anti-Semitism would prevail and it doesn't matter?
This is all anti-Semitism. That's why I'm asking your friend to check himself, to see if he can be self-aware and go, is he right? Is there something here he's talking about that may be right? Look, in 1973, when 4 Arab countries Pearl Harbored Israel on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, right? Talk about like sadistic. Imagine doing that on other countries on their biggest, most precious days of atonement. Israel's prime minister was a woman, a grandmother. No one looked sympathetically at Israel. When Israel, which was a very young country in 1972, had their entire Olympic team murdered by Palestinian terrorists, the world didn't even stop the Olympics. They just said, all right, whatever, right? There's anti-Semitism there. I don't know whether if the Finnish team or the Norwegian team had been slaughtered by terrorists, whether the Olympic Games would have gone on. And guess what? It took decades for them to actually have a real ceremony to honor the victims of that crime. So, Israel was, there was a time when Israel was young. It was not the startup nation. It did not have the best military in the world. It really was the underdog, but no one treated them like the underdog.
Yeah, you mentioned the book, but I didn't know that that one of the early wars were fought with like used weapons from Czechoslovakia.
Crap. They spit and glue, Scott. They didn't have the first war. They didn't have one airplane, not one. Israel now has what's known as probably the most qualitative air force in the world. Maybe the Americans as well. I'm sure Donald Trump would say that. Let's say they're equal. Let's say it's not. Let's say Israel's in second place. Israel fought the first wars without any planes. And when people are saying these are Westerners that are being put in power by America, America didn't even support Israel's first two wars. Israel literally was doing it with spit and glue, using weapons from Czechoslovakia that had already been warehoused. They're just good at this. Eventually, they developed their own weapons. They eventually developed their own planes, their own tanks. But those first few wars, when Israel's never started a war. I mean, people, on campus, do they know that the Palestinians have rejected 5 offers for statehood?
Yeah. What's that book, Getting to Yes?
Yeah.
I mean, about negotiation. How do you get, because the last Arafat rejected a capital in East Jerusalem. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. And every time they come back, they're getting less, but they still, even under Oslo with Bill Clinton, received 97% of what they purportedly asked for. She said the problem is what they purportedly asked for wasn't the honest answer, because what they really wanted was no Jews and to have all the Palestinians around the world return and live in Israel as an Arab country. And in the end, that's what your friend isn't admitting. What do you mean the elections? There are no elections because everyone is united in the idea that Jews don't belong here and they should be killed. And that's what I'm asking your friend. Is that what he really thinks? Because that's what he's cheering on. That's what he's excusing. He's excusing people that have walked away from 5 peace offers because in the end of the day, it looked like a good deal on paper, but it's because they weren't really being honest about what was missing. What was missing were dead Jews and a Jewless country, no Israel. And that's the proof of that, because otherwise, why not start the country? What's a real tragedy? Gaza would be in the 20th year of a new country. If they had, in 2005, said, all right, here's our flag. We're starting a new country. We want to live in peace. They would be in year 21 right now. They could be celebrating their 21st birthday. Palestinians overall could have, in 1947, had their own country. In 1967, in 1978, in 1990, not 2000, in 2006, and even during the Trump years, the Peace to Prosperity Plan, they could have had their own country. Notice Trump, after his last attempt with giving them a country in 2000, whatever that was, 2000, I guess it was 2003, right now he's not talking about that anymore. He's tired. I think that's what's true of the Gulf countries, the Gulf countries that signed the Abraham Accords. They're tired of Palestinian petulance. They see that the Palestinians are just petulant. They're just saying, we're going to gnash our teeth and sit in refugee camps forever. And we're going to consign our children to lives of misery because we want to get that house back in Haifa. And I want that olive tree, not that olive tree. It has to be that olive tree.
This is there. You quote The West Wing in your book, and I was a huge West Wing fan. I've watched it through numerous times. But when they have their episode around Gaza, the chairman, who is the Arafat character, asks Mary McCormick's character, "Will I get to go home again?" And she says, "Probably not. But is that better than having no home? Is it better to have no home at all?" And that's it, right? I mean, part of negotiations are everybody has some disappointment, right? Nobody gets everything they want. I mean, I wonder, what is your hope for
Scott, can I tell your audience something that you should know?
Absolutely.
Here's something that I want to know. I wonder if your friend feels sorry for me. I want to ask him this. Thane made a plea. I am a child of Holocaust survivors. And my family, I've been to Poland several different times. And there's a lot of property on my father's and mother's side, and I don't get it back. I've never received 10 cents. I don't sit here gnashing my teeth, holding a key to some house in Warsaw and a business in Lublin. The world moves on. It's only the Palestinians that don't move on. All over the world, wars are lost and fought, and nations absorb other people. We have kept the Palestinians in a state of perpetual impasse in order to function as an eyesore against the Jews. But in every other part of the world, people move, they get assimilated into some other country. It's only the Palestinians. So even West Wing picked up on that. Who the hell do you think you are that you're the only person on the planet that must get that house back? Because that house isn't coming back. Do you want a country or not? Do you want a country or not? Because if you're going to hold out for that house, you're going to hold out for hundreds and hundreds of years. And what the Palestinians are saying is, we can wait. We're good with that. And the world, instead of saying, you're not waiting, we're not putting up with this bullshit. You're going to move over there, and you're moving over now, and you're going to like it. You're going to like it. You're going to live in a nice place instead of a refugee. That's what Trump is actually saying. You're going to live in something nice. Don't you want to live in a place that's nice? And the Palestinians are saying, no, we will live in a shit house until we get back the house that we want in Israel without any Jews as neighbors. And the world should be saying, we're not tolerating that. We don't tell. And that's what I think is happening in the Persian Gulf. I think that's what you saw with UAE and Sudan. You're seeing Morocco, these countries that are signing up to normalize relationships with Israel are saying, the Palestinians lead us nowhere but misery, and the Israelis lead us to new inventions, new sources of investment, new developments. And the Palestinians don't want a country. So let's, the world will move on without the Palestinians until they're prepared to finally say, I'll take 97% of what I want.
You wrote a sentence in the book that I sometimes say these sentences. As I interview people, I say, I wish I would have written the sentence. It's so profound and so well said. You say the agony of an enemy fearful of collateral damage can serve the same function as an iron dome for terrorists who could care less about the death of their own people. Do you want to unpack that for a second?
The Gazans, the Hamas believes it has an iron dome. It's called our people. It's very cheap. We don't give a shit about them. We'll tell them that their lives will be, Allah will love it, and you'll have 70 virgins or whatever you're getting. We'll tell them they're all Islamists. That's what makes them also very different from West Bank Palestinians. They're very religious Muslims. We don't give a shit about them. We'll keep them handy as human shields, and we'll force the agony of the Israelis that don't want to kill civilians. We'll force them to kill civilians. And then we'll blame them for killing civilians. We don't have an iron dome, but this is sort of an iron dome because it allows us to delegitimize Israel in the eyes of the world. They're killing our babies.
They're playing the long game, right? I mean, so they're banking on the fact that the woman at the Queers for Palestine rally eventually becomes a soccer mom, and when she's 35, is voting for politicians that delegitimize Israel, right? Because I remember
your friend. They're counting that he'll run for Congress. A guy whose moral distinctions are so blinkered, there's something's wrong. I'm saying it again. Something's not right in his wiring. Something's not right. It's not personal. It's just not right, right? You've got to search yourself. They're hoping that he ends up with power. They're hoping that the people that are holding up signs, and by the way, they're not wrong, because you are seeing what happened during this war at places like the New York Times and the liberal and the mainstream media. A lot of the people that were indoctrinated with this utter nonsense of moral relativism and this hatred of Israel now are editors at Random House, and they're editors at the Washington Post, and they work at museums. They have good jobs. Your friend may actually have a really good job. They're counting on him, and you see this, the BBC is, a wholly owned subsidiary of Hamas. They haven't had one article, one news story that has anything favorable to say about Israel. No one's ever honest about Palestinian sufferings, about their complicity, and how that they share some blame for their suffering. No one wants to cover that. And these are people who, you're right, maybe your friend is in this category. He has a BA. He actually should know better, but he somehow wound up in this very weird world of moral confusion where the bad guys are being treated virtuous, as if there's something really to be ennobling about them. You know, yes, that was necessary to them to gang rape girls. It was necessary. And the Israelis, it's unnecessary and unjust and a war crime to fire missiles, rockets, knowing that a civilian may be killed. When in fact, words like casualties of war and collateral damage have been with us for centuries and millennia. But only today is something called collateral damage. And you know what's the worst part of this? It's not just that we're ignoring the genocide in Ethiopia and in Sudan and Congo and Rwanda and Syria. It's not just that, and China with the Uyghurs, as I mentioned. It's that we have trivialized the genocides that even took place in the past, to the Cambodians and against the Tutsis and the Armenian genocide, that we've trivialized. Because if all collateral damage now is genocide, then there is no genocide. If we're going to now call collateral damage in war genocide, good luck. People who are victims of genocide now will know that all killings of civilian, no matter how the circumstances, you know, the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, Scott, doesn't call the genocide in Bosnia and Herzegovina as genocide. You know why? Because it's officially was a war. It's only in Srebrenica, where 5,000 or 8,000 civilians were killed. It's only that one area that's considered genocide. So even the Bosnian genocide or Herzegovina, those areas are not technically under international law, not called genocide. So if that's not genocide, I don't see how the ICC or the ICJ can come back with a ruling that Israel has committed genocide. We're already on record saying if you're in a war, unless you're actually a part of it is designed only to kill the civilians. So with Srebrenica, that was the one area of the Bosnian genocide that's considered a genocide. So again, your friend has to explain that. He needs to explain why is it that under international law that was considered war and a war of aggression, but war and not genocide. But here it's absolute genocide. Why? And the answer is it can only be one reason, because I really like the idea of indicting Jews.
Thane, you've written a great book, and I thank you so much for writing it. I really feel like I learned a lot reading it, and thanks for coming on the show and talking with me about it.
Anytime for you, Scott, buddy. You're an important voice, and I'm happy to help be part of it. And I'm grateful to have this platform. And if your friend wants to write me, I'm happy to have a civil conversation. I might even apologize if at the end of the conversation about calling him an imbecile. You can restore my faith in humanity.
All right. Thanks, Thane.
Bye, buddy. Thanks.